Hello, welcome to the Team SNG tutorial. Today we are going to be doing a tutorial on side decking. Now this is going to be telling you, these are the best deck cards to side deck in the current meta. I'm not doing that. Alright, the meta changes from day to day, from week to week, from month to month. So, we're not going to be talking about the best cards to side deck, we're going to be talking about how to design a side deck. While I've got your attention real quick, I'd like to ask you, leave us a like, leave us a comment, leave us a subscribe, check out the team's Facebook page, links down below, and if you're feeling generous, check out the team's Patreon. Also, Patreon's kind of cool, guys. It gives you a chance to get involved and have your decks featured on the channel. So there's lots of different ways about going about this. First thing we're going to talk about is, what turn does your deck want to go? If you're playing something like Altergeist, which desperately needs to go first, if you're playing something like Karakuri that aims to build a big board that makes it difficult for your opponent to play the game, you're going to want to, again, go first. If you're playing something like Zombie World Control, this again, much like Altergeist, is a control deck, and it really likes to go first. These are all examples of decks that like to go first. Decks like this, though, often have a hard time going second. So, what do they need to do? Well, they need to side for those games where they're going to be forced to go second. How do they do that? Well, first things first, they could side in some of the power-going second cards that the game has given to us, such as Nibiru, or Dark Ruler No More, or even, in certain cases, Super Polymerization. These are all very powerful going second cards that make it so that a going first deck has the chance to play on their own turn. Now obviously there's drawbacks to each, Nibiru gives your opponent a token. Dark Ruler No More makes it so that you can't deal battle damage. And Super Poly requires your opponent to play stuff that you've got material for. However, these are good options for when you have to go second. So now that we've talked about what you're going to side in, let's talk about what you would side out. So in the case of Zombie World, you're likely already running Super Polymerization for that Dragon Necro Nether Soul Dragon. So you're probably not going to be siding that in at all. It'll already be there. However, you're probably not running Dark Ruler No More and Nibiru. What would you side out for Nibiru? Obviously, you can't side out important combo pieces, such as Unizombie or Glow Up Bloom. And you certainly couldn't side out anything quite as critical as Zombie World. So, what are you going to side out in this situation? Well, in this sort of situation, if you take a look at my current Zombie World deck profile, which is featured on the channel, right up here, then you could side out potentially Solemn Strike, because you can't set that going first. So you would side out potentially 3 of them to make room for 3 Dark Ruler No Mores. As I've already stated, you're probably already running Super Polymerization. And Nibiru, while it's not a bad thing to side in this deck, it's not the greatest. So, there's no harm in leaving that in the side deck but for this sort of situation. In Altergeist, as I've stated, you're running several redundant traps. Things you could definitely think about siding out. Again, with your Altergeists, you're running Solemn Strike. Don't get me wrong, Solemn Strike's a great card, but if you have to go second, Solemn Strike's possibly not doing you any good. So you could side out Solemn Strike for Nibiru. You really don't have any fusion targets for Super Poly, so there's no point in siding in Super Poly. And again, Dark Ruler No More is definitely an option to let you play through whatever your opponent's playing. So you could side out 3 Solemn Strikes for your Dark Ruler No Mores, and maybe even 3 Titanociders for your Dark Ruler No Mores. If you want to see the Altergeist profile, the link is up here as well. But just to give you a point of reference, you could side out your Solemn Strikes and your Titanociders to give you Dark Ruler No More and Nibiru going second. So, we've talked about siding to go second. What about siding to go first? Some decks are going second orientated. For instance, let's talk about Unchained. Unchained is a going second deck. Now, don't get me wrong, it is one of those that can go first and go second, but it is a going second deck. It is orientated around doing stuff when your opponent has built a board. This weekend, I actually played in a remote duel extravaganza, and I played on day one a Fallen of Albaz based deck, which is all about using Titaniclad, the Ash Dragon, and Kaijus to let you go second and OTK. This, again, is a going second deck. It struggles to go first. And that does happen. That is a common occurrence in Yu-Gi-Oh! These days. There are decks designed around going second. Another good example of a going second deck is Ancient Warriors. This deck has a break a board mentality, which is completely designed around breaking your opponent's board and putting yourself in a good situation. Now, going second definitely does have its appeals, but you are likely going to have to play through lots of different negations. So, how do you properly side for those games where you're going to be forced to go first? There's lots of different ways you can go about it. One thing you could do is opt to side in hand traps. Maybe your deck doesn't run them. And if your deck doesn't run them, in this day and age, you're probably not playing Yu-Gi-Oh! Correctly. Or you're just following my deck recipes, because I'm not a massive fan of them. But you might want to side in some hand traps. That's definitely an option. You might actually want to side in some trap cards, like your Solemn Strike that we just talked about taking out of going first decks. For instance, in Unchained, it makes sense for you to have some hand traps to try and stop your opponent from building a board you can't overcome. Unchained is all about breaking the opponent's board, do not get me wrong. But if they build too big a board, it can sometimes be difficult to deal with. So in this case, you might want to side in Ash Blossom or Ghost Ogre to try and stop them in their tracks. And in return, what you're possibly going to side out, if you're using a deck similar to my Unchained deck, which is linked up here, you might side out cards like Super Polymerization to make room for cards like Solemn Strike or your hand traps. You could also potentially side out some of your draw power. Chances are you're not going to need all of the draw power you have because you're not going to be able to build the board you want to build anyway. So you might want to side out some of your draw power so that you can limit what your opponent is going to do. And the benefit of limiting what your opponent's going to do is it then forces you to play for what I call turn 3. It's what everyone calls turn 3. Playing for turn 3 is sometimes the best way to side if you're a going second deck being forced to go first. And playing for turn 3 means stalling your opponent just enough that you can do what you want to do on your second turn. In the case of Fallen of Albaz, the deck profile isn't out yet, but if you subscribe, you'll see it in next week. Fallen of Albaz runs a lot of Kaijus. Fantastic for going second. Not so good for going first. So, in that situation, you might want to side out some of your Kaijus for Solemn Strike. Now, Fallen of Albaz does also run a large danger package, using some of the less popular dangers to run alongside the more popular ones. In that situation, you might also decide to side out some of your dangers, allowing you to set some traps that'll let you go first. Because your deck does solely rely on being able to go second, and when it can't, it can often stall out. Finally, we've talked about it. already, but Ancient Warriors, Masterful Summon. Ancient Warriors, I do apologize. Ancient Warriors are a great deck in the sense that they can go first and go second, but they are typically a going second deck. If you are worried that your opponent will force you to go first, you might want to side out some of the power cards that the deck runs, such as Loyal Guan Yang. He only does you any good if your opponent controls a monster and you don't. If you're going first, he's doing nothing for you. You may also want to side out Gamma Seal. The deck runs him because he's a useful card to help break through troublesome boards. But if you're going first, you're not breaking through anything. What's the point in running him? Side him out. That'll give you the opportunity to put in cards like Solemn Strike, Ash Blossom, and Ghost Ogre, and other hand traps that are out there. So we've talked about siding for your turn matchups, and that's great. That's not a bad place to start. That does require that you understand your deck and what your deck wants to do. If you need a little help with that, a video will be coming out later this week. Again, make sure you subscribe to see it. Let's talk about another facet of the game. So currently, as we're recording this, one of the biggest decks in the game is Virtual World. And they like to end themselves on a VFD. Because of that, designing a side deck that will help you get around VFD is definitely a very good move to make. So, for day 2 of the tournament, I ended up playing an amalgamation of Unchained and Fallen of Albaz. So my Unchained deck runs the Platter Plant engine, and it now runs Fallen of Albaz as well to help me break through an opponent's board. At this point, the deck is pretty good at going first and going second. So I'm going to give you an overview of what my side deck looks like. Currently, my side deck runs 3 copies of Dark Ruler No More. The deck doesn't aim to OTK, it aims to slow your opponent down and control the board state. It aims to put your Unchained monsters on the board and slow your opponent down. So there's no harm in running Dark Ruler No More and extending the game a little further. The deck doesn't currently main any hand traps, so I am siding 3 Ash Blossom and 2 Ghost Ogre. Now, these hand traps in the current matchup of stopping VFD, not necessarily the greatest, but it's not the end of the world because of the very simple fact that they're good in other matchups. Things like Invoked could be stopped by an Ash Blossom, or Ghost Ogre for that matter. Now, because I'm running Fallen of Albaz, which is a very good card going second, but not so great going first, I'm running 2 Dogmatica encounters to give him the chance to go first. I also found in my Saturday tournament where I was playing the Fallen of Albaz deck to come later on the channel, that Crackdown was an incredible trap card to help me deal with Virtual World and VFD. Taking one of their level 9s away from them does make them have a hard time. Again, you're only going to need this if you're going first. So, this is a side deck to go first. Finally, you want to side for what's out there in the meta. And if you're not sure, siding in some back row removal is always a good option. This is the example of my side deck that I played on day 2, using an Unchained Fusion deck that utilizes Fallen of Albaz. If we can get this video to 15 likes within 2 weeks, I will do the Unchained Fallen of Albaz deck profile during the Patreon profile week, seeing as I currently have no Patreon profiles. If you want your deck featured on the channel, links down below to the Patreon, find out how. So this is what my side deck looks like, and I've explained the reasoning behind it all. This is to stop Virtual World and their level 9s. This is to stop decks that require searching and allows you to pop cards, problem cards. In Unchained, that's a fantastic play. This is something specific to the deck. And this is because I'm playing for turn 3 anyway. So what's the harm? The general rule of thumb is side for the off turn. If you're going first, side to go second. And if you're going second, side to go first. Once you've managed to do that, you've given your deck the best opportunity to do what it wants to do on the turn that it doesn't want to play on. And that's a really powerful thing. Once you've done that, you then want to side for the meta. What you're expecting to see. If you're expecting to see a lot of things like Altergeist or Zombie War Control that requires its back row, maybe side in things to deal with that. If you're expecting to see your opponent pump out boss monster after boss monster, maybe you need to side to stop that. I do hope this has been helpful, and I'd like to thank you guys for watching. Make sure you do leave us a like, leave us a comment, leave us a subscribe. Let us know, what would you put in your side deck to deal with... Let us know, what would you put in your side deck to play on the off turn? And as stated, check out the other videos on the channel to see some of these decks that we've talked about today. And I will see you guys at the next video.